The market square reeked of wet straw, smoke, and desperation. A thin drizzle fell from the colorless sky, soaking through cloaks and pooling in the cobbled cracks beneath people's boots. The crowd pressed in around the raised wooden platform, drawn by a morbid curiosity that had become far too common in these times. 3 small figures stood huddled on the platform. Sacks covered their heads, tied loosely at the necks with twine. Their clothes hung off their thin frames in damp tatters. No names, no ages, no backstories. Just a single sign nailed to the post behind them. Orphans, 3 for 1 silver. The auctioneer, a stout man with a crooked nose and a bored expression, gestured toward them with a stick. 3 strong young ones here. Might be mute, might just be stubborn. Either way, they're quiet. No trouble. Good for labor. Laughter rippled through the crowd, bitter, careless. The kind that grows in people who've seen too much grief and buried too many of their own. From the edge of the square, a tall woman in a black veil watched without speaking. Her name was Elsbeth Halgrave, known to most only as the widow. Her husband had been a shipbuilder, dead 10 years. Her daughter, Marin, had vanished with the fever 5 years after that. Since then, Elsbeth rarely spoke, rarely left the manor on the cliffside. Yet something had drawn her here today. The wind pulled at her cloak as she stepped forward, the crowd parting for her out of instinct or unease. Whispers followed in her wake. Ghost stories clung to her like the perfume of wilted roses. Some said she went mad with grief, others claimed she dined with shadows. She stopped in front of the children. They didn't react to her presence. They didn't even shift. One leaned slightly to the side, as though they might fall over at any moment. How much? She asked quietly, her voice dry as old parchment. The auctioneer straightened, surprised. 3 for 1 silver, madam. Discounted. No returns. She opened a velvet pouch and placed a coin in his hand without haggling. Its weight was heavier than gold, heavy with a different kind of cost. I'll take them, Elsbeth said. You sure, widow? The auctioneer asked. They don't even talk. They don't need to. With no cart, no servants, no explanation, she took the orphans by the hand, 2 in 1, the smallest trailing behind, and walked them out of the square as the rain began to fall harder. No one followed. No one asked why. Behind her, the crowd murmured and drifted away, already forgetting the children who had stood in silence, with sacks over their heads. The manor stood like a forgotten monument on the cliffside, its windows dark and shuttered, its stones blackened with moss and time. Ivy clung to its bones like desperate fingers. Once, it had been beautiful, filled with music, light, the laughter of a child. Now, it groaned in the wind and whispered only to itself. Elsbeth led the children up the long path, their small hands tight in hers, their bare feet slick with mud. They made no sound as they walked, not even a whimper of protest. Behind their sodden sacks, their breath came in slow, even rhythm, as if they had already learned that silence was safety. Inside, the manor smelled of lavender and dust. The hearth in the main room hadn't been lit in days, but the logs were stacked neatly, and the flint sat on the mantel as always. Elsbeth moved with quiet purpose, kneeling before the fireplace, striking the flint until the spark caught. Flames licked the wood hungrily, and warm light finally reached the corners of the room. She turned to them then, her eyes shadowed beneath the veil. You may sit, she said softly. The children did, curling like stray cats before the fire, still masked by the sacks. Not a single hand reached up to remove them. Perhaps they feared what came after. Perhaps they'd forgotten they could. She brought them bowls of broth, thin, but hot, with potato and a trace of thyme. They held the bowls beneath the sacks, tilting them up without fumbling. She noticed this, noted it quietly. You must be able to see through the cloth, she said, more to herself than to them. Or else you've done this before. There was no answer. She didn't press. For days, this became their rhythm. The children would wake early and wait silently by the kitchen door. Elsbeth would serve porridge. They would help in the garden, weeding and watering. In the afternoons, they swept the halls with careful, delicate steps, never bumping into the walls, never speaking. They ate dinner by firelight and then curled up in the parlor, motionless until sleep took them. She gave them names, because it hurt to call them child, and pretend she didn't wonder. The tallest she called Ash, for the streaks of soot always left behind after he cleaned the hearth. The middle one became Bramble, always pulling thorns from her sleeves after wandering the garden path. The smallest, who trailed behind and clung most often to her skirt, she named Moth, for the way they hovered close to the light, never quite touching it. She tried not to ask where they came from. She told herself it didn't matter. They were safe now, that was enough. But sometimes, late at night, she would sit in the rocking chair near the window and wonder. Who had tied the sacks so gently? Who had taught them to be invisible? The storm rolled in without warning. Thunder cracked like old bones snapping, and the wind moaned through the gaps in the shutters. Rain lashed against the windows in sharp, angry bursts. Somewhere in the distance, the sea slammed against the cliffside, furious and endless. Inside the manor, the fire burned low. Elsbeth sat in her high-backed chair, a thick book of poetry open on her lap, though she hadn't turned a page in an hour. Her eyes drifted toward the children, who sat on the rug before the hearth, their backs to her, still and silent as always. Ash, Bramble, and Moth. She had learned to read their movements, their small habits. Ash always sat cross-legged, hands folded neatly in his lap. Bramble curled inward, chin resting on her knees. Moth leaned slightly toward the flame, as if he could absorb its warmth into his bones. She stared at them through the flickering firelight and sighed quietly, the weight of the silence pressing into her chest like cold stone. I wonder, she said aloud, her voice barely above the hiss of the storm outside, if you can even speak. Or if someone took that from you. The fire cracked sharply. None of the children moved. She closed the book with a soft thud and set it aside. Her voice came again, firmer this time, though laced with something softer, curiosity, or perhaps loneliness that had grown too heavy. Do none of you have anything to say? Still nothing. She stood slowly and stepped closer, her skirts brushing the edge of the rug. The flickering light revealed more now, mud crusted on their hems, small scabs on elbows, fingers that trembled ever so slightly though the room was warm. She was about to turn away, retreat back to her silence, when it happened. A small voice, hoarse and uncertain, broke through the air like a thread unraveling. Elsbeth. It came from the smallest one. Moth. She froze, her breath caught in her throat. What? She whispered. The child lifted their head. The sack shifted slightly, revealing a glimpse of a dirt-streaked chin, a pale jawline. Then, slowly, deliberately, they reached up with both hands and pulled the sack from their head. A small face blinked up at her, eyes wide, sunken. Slightly from hunger, rimmed with the weary kind of knowing a child shouldn't possess. The face was different than she remembered, aged by hardship, by absence. But even through the grime and fear, there was something achingly familiar. Elsbeth sank to her knees cracking on the floorboards. You said my name, she murmured. The child's lip quivered. Their voice, more certain now, came again, breaking into something fragile and desperate. Mama. The word shattered something in the room. Elsbeth gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She reached out, slowly, as though afraid the child might vanish if she moved too fast. Her fingers trembled as she touched the child's cheek, brushing aside strands of matted hair. The others still sat unmoving, still masked, but their heads turned toward her now, drawn by the sound, by the unraveling of whatever spell had held them silent for so long. Mama. The child said again, and this time the voice cracked, not with fear, but with recognition. The fire popped in the hearth, sending a spray of sparks upward as the wind howled beyond the stone walls. The storm outside was at its peak now, rattling shutters, shaking rafters, slamming sheets of rain against the glass as though the world was trying to break in. But within the room, time had gone still. Elsbeth knelt before the smallest child, her hands trembling as they cupped the child's cheeks. She stared into the eyes that looked up at her, eyes too old for their age, rimmed in red, sunken by hunger but still holding a flicker of something that hadn't died, recognition. Mama. The child whispered again, and this time it wasn't a question. It was a plea, a remembering, a coming home. Elsbeth brushed back the filthy strands of hair from the child's brow. Her throat ached to speak, but her voice wouldn't come. So she did the only thing she could. She pulled the child into her arms and held them close, burying her face in the child's shoulder as a sob broke loose. It echoed in the room like a bell. Behind her, the other two children shifted. Ash turned his head. Bramble hesitated, then slowly, cautiously, reached up and began to untie the twine at her neck. One by one, the sacks fell to the floor. 3 small faces now stared back at Elsbeth, tired, cautious, but unmasked. Each carried the wounds of abandonment, of being passed from hand to hand like a thing, not a life. But in the eyes of the smallest, her child, there was a glimmer of something more than survival. A thread of memory. Elsbeth sat back on her heels, tears streaking down her face. How did you come to that place? The child hesitated, glancing sideways at the others, as if unsure what could be spoken. They told us you were gone, they said finally. That no one would come. That we didn't belong to anyone anymore. Her heart clenched. Who told you that? The child didn't answer. Ash looked away. Bramble's fingers curled into the rug. It didn't matter now. Not tonight, not in this moment. I searched for you, Elsbeth said, her voice breaking. I searched every road, every camp, every grave. I never stopped. The child looked up at her. We waited. I thought maybe you forgot. No, she said, shaking her head fiercely. Never. I remembered you every single day. Every night I prayed I'd see your face again. And I dreamed. Her voice caught. I dreamed I'd hear you say my name. They leaned into her, head against her chest. I remembered it, even with the sack on. I said it every night under my breath. Behind them, Bramble quietly edged closer, then Ash. All 3 children now circled her like orbiting moons, drawn to her warmth, to the steady, aching love that had endured across the distance and years. Elsbeth gathered them in her arms. Her voice, though cracked, held strength now. You belong here. This is your home. You always had one. The fire flared. The storm raged on. But inside the manor, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, there was more than silence.